Yeah, well, it's funny because one thing that I have a love-hate relationship with is LinkedIn, because the people who are getting the most attention are not the people you should be listening to. And I'll give you a case in point of this. So like I joined a mentorship, like career services program with the former VP of Nielsen, like the data aggregation company. And it's interesting because I found he actually connected with me, who I have a bigger following than him, which is like absurd as hell, if you ask me. But part of it's like, I just started this podcast when analytics was hot. Like I've been running this consistently for 5 years. But yeah, he reached out. It's funny because I saw his post about like starting the mentorship group, and I went and looked at the messages. It's like, oh, he reached out to me like 2 years ago, and we had like a brief conversation. So it's almost like the people who are posting the most consistently have like some ego void to fill, and they're doing it to kind of self-soothe or make themselves feel better, versus like the people who are actually saying something that is important or is true. They don't get as much engagement as like, I am so sick and tired of like, here are the top 3 tricks to land your first analytics job. And it's just the same iteration of that over and over and over again. But I see 500, 1,000, 3,000 engagements on that. And it's just vapid, not helpful, but I guess it feels good. I don't know. It's a really strange kind of, it's almost like an inversion to what should be. Like it's weird that I'm interviewing people who are in positions of like, you know, authority, and they're kind of like intimidated when I send them a message. But then I go in to work at the fresh market, and it's like the VP doesn't see me that way at all. You know, like I'm in the hierarchy. It's a really strange time.
Well, I think what you're describing, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but have you ever been to like a party and the loudest person, let's say college, for example.
Yeah. Oh,
you're at a party in college and the loudest voice in the room is getting the attention, but that's probably not the most interesting voice. And I think that's sort of just, I think, a human thing where just because you're getting a lot of eyeballs doesn't mean what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's even the most valid. It just maybe happens to raise the most attention, right? And so when we're thinking about, okay, there are people out there who are pumping out some really amazing content. They're not getting noticed because they're not actually after that ego trip. They're not actually after being the loudest voice in the room. I think they're more value aligned. And I'd like to think that you and I are similar in this way, where we're interested in being intentional in what it is that we're sharing for a specific kind of audience. And if it can be meaningful, then great, right? That's the hope. But it's not just saying things to say them. And there's a level of being deliberate there, which takes real mindfulness, truly, because one of the concepts that I'm familiar with, I think you would be as well, is this idea behind audience capture. Yep. And as people view your stuff, and you know, as a data analyst, I'm sure you can relate to this. You're like, okay, well, clip A versus clip B. Well, clip A got more views, so that must mean that that's what the audience likes. So what am I incentivized to do? I'm more likely to produce more of that same content. But you have this slow drift over time where now all of a sudden, have you lost some of your authenticity as a result of that? What are you chasing? Are you chasing what it is that your audience wants? Or are you chasing what it is that you started to try to do in more of a value aligned way? And honestly, that's just a universal challenge, right? Because it's very hard to not play that social game. I would be guilty of it as well. Like, of course, I'm going to be caught in that. And it's really key to stay value aligned, I think.
Well, I guess where my mind is going is, it seems unhealthy for the people who are following that content. So you're seeking out content that validates your own mindset. Like in this space, all I need to do is just build a portfolio and learn Power BI and I'll get an analytics job. Yep. And it's just not that simple, because it's, to your point, it's a case by case basis, but it's almost like they're seeking comfort in someone who is ultimately just taking their attention and monetizing it. It feels
Bingo.
almost like cancerous in a way.
Bingo.
To me.
Yeah. Well, and it lacks discernment, right? So you can trick yourself into believing that the content that you're seeing is helping you. But
yeah,
true change comes from your ability to actualize what it is that you're learning.
Well, so, also just, it's uncomfortable. It's the opposite of that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think when you're consuming content, it's only as good as what you do with it. And if you're just sitting in your bedroom listening to some people pump out some content related, let's just say some of the stuff you just mentioned, which is not my I don't know a lot of what you're referencing, but if you're like, yeah, that's great. Now I'm one step closer to being a data analyst. It's like, well, is that actually true, or what have you done?
Right. Yeah, it's like I guess you're kind of in the herd. So there's like a group and comfort in numbers type thing, but it's not actually moving the needle in any meaningful way.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's the equivalent of anything in pop psychology. You pick up a book and you're like, wow, now I understand this. Okay, it's one thing to intellectually understand it and grasp it. It's another thing to apply it. And to your point, what's the harder of the two? I mean, it's great, by the way, not to say anything disparaging to the people who are actually absorbing content, because there's a step prior to that where people just don't even engage. So on a spectrum of people who are engaging versus not engaging, I guess you deserve some credit for engaging with some of this stuff in hopes of learning. And so the learning aspect is key. What do you then do with the learning is, I think, the difference maker.
Right. Which that's much harder
harder.
Distill down into a punchy post that has 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 and into it.
Way harder.
So yeah, I guess go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I guess it's just hard. It's the point I want to get across is I worry about the people who listen to this podcast and social media, specifically LinkedIn, negatively impacting their mental health because maybe they're searching for a job and all of the people they're seeing are like senior analysts or doing like a kick or like, I just landed my dream job. I think it's a recipe for getting discouraged and feeling kind of inferior.
So what have you noticed in terms of mental health within that field? Like what are people sort of feeling, do you think?
Well, okay.
When they get discouraged, do they just bow out or what happens?
Well, so I ran a career services program for 2 years. So I got a direct line to people who were transitioning. So I teach at Greensboro College. So I'm very well kind of versed in helping a student go from college to their first entry level job. It's a little bit more complex when I've worked in insurance sales for 5 years and now I want my first analytics job. So that's I get your point of it's a case by case thing. But one thing I've noticed is that those people trying to make that job transition, it's very hard on your mental health because, first of all, there's uncertainty that you've got to wrestle with. Then there's the imposter syndrome of oh, I don't know if I can even do this job. But then also too, there's the hard reality of the job postings that you see are wish lists, not the actual, the job for the role that I'm in now. They listed 2 pages of roles and responsibilities. And it's maybe 5 lines is what I'm actually doing. But if you're new to the space, you can't discern that. You can't tell okay, this is kind of BS. The classic example is R and Python or Snowflake and Databricks are 2 systems or tools that you use one or the other. You don't use both at the same time, but a company might list both and you need to have 5 years experience in both. And then the person seeing that is I have this one, but I don't have this other. So I think that the first challenge is getting that first job.